Hello, book burners, and welcome to Books Are Burning. I'm Mark Will, and I'm here once again with GJ Villa. This is part three of our discussion of Benjamín Labatut's When We Cease to Understand the World. And today we will be discussing chapter three, I guess you would call it, The Heart of the Heart. Now, the main character in The Heart of the Heart is Alexander Grothendieck, a famous 20th century mathematician. And I've got some interesting images of him here. There he is as a younger man, looking hale and hearty and athletic. And then here he is, a little bit older, looking like, as Labatut says, the identical twin of Michel Foucault, and he's holding a baby there. I guess that's his. And then here he is as an old man looking like fucking Gandalf or somebody, an old wizard or hermit or mystic of some sort. So three different faces of Grothendieck. And let me just share some of the quotes related to our main character here, which I found interesting. He is described, Grothendieck is described as having revolutionized our understanding of space and time, not just once, but twice. And he's, of course, famous for this phrase, the heart of the heart, which is the title of chapter 3 that we're discussing today. And this is described as an entity Grothendieck had discovered at the very center of mathematics. We'll try to explain exactly what it is. It's not exactly clear, really, but maybe we can get to the heart of the heart of the heart. Space and time was his lifelong obsession. He was interested in expanding the notion of the point. And in relation to that, it's commented that no one had proposed something so bold since Euclid. This is his theory of the point. And randomly, he liked ugly women, squalid apartments, dilapidated rooms. He was stateless. He was capable of sleeping at will. He was a man who simply did not resemble other human beings. And a fellow mathematician said this about him: my first impression on hearing him lecture was that he had been transported to our planet from an alien civilization in some distant solar system in order to speed up our intellectual evolution. So this is our man, Grothendieck. Anything you want to react to there?
Yeah, I mean, a fascinating figure. I didn't know anything about you. General humanities people, you might know a good bit about 20th century philosophy, literature, etc., but didn't know anything about this guy. We're introduced to him by way of another real life mathematician, the Japanese Shinichi. What is it? Mochizuki. I think you pronounce Japanese better than I, given your extensive Asian background. How would you pronounce his last name?
Well, I'd say Mochizuki.
Mochizuki. All right, fair enough.
And
So that's
here he is,
there he is.
handsome Japanese professor. He's a real person.
He's a real person who looks a little bit like he's described at one point as handsome. I think akin to a kind of Japanese Clark Kent, right? Um,
Hmm.
is the way that Labatut describes him. But anyway, this strange section begins with Mochizuki, right? This renowned mathematician who is a bit hermit-like, according to Labatut, who when was it, 2013 or something like that, proposed the solution to what's called the A plus B equals C conundrum. And Labatut narrates that to this day, no one has managed to comprehend it. So the chapter begins by announcing its theme, the unknowability and abstruseness of genius level mathematics. And so again, we are continuing this exploration of enigmas and abysses, the far reaches of abstract human knowledge. Yeah, those of us who are not mathematicians, even those who may be, probably can't understand any of this language, right? We're
Well,
told
we
early.
expect idiots like us won't be able to comprehend it, but even other mathematicians, after looking at his uh
His proof, quote unquote,
explanation, his
his
proof, yeah,
100
said,
pages of proof, right?
yeah, they said, or some of them said, impossible to understand.
Right. And he dubs his new mathematics, Mochizuki, um, quote unquote, it says, without a trace of either modesty or irony, inter-universal Teichmuller theory. Anyway, I encourage the reader to do a quick Wikipedia search of that and try to read that entry and see what that means. It is like another language altogether. Who knows? Anyway, so the point is, we begin by being introduced to this man who has delved into the furthest reaches of the mathematical universe, and through this person, we then it's almost like a frame narrative, right? We get in the frame of chapter 3, and then we enter into the story of Grothendieck, the stateless mathematician, right? So one of the things that Labatut, and we talked about in previous episodes, says, right, is that in this work that he's constructed, the fiction kind of blooms from one chapter to the next. He's drawing upon historical figures and historical facts, but then arranging them in unique ways. In this chapter, he said that when he was doing the research about Grothendieck, and I believe I'm mispronouncing that name. How did you pronounce it? Perhaps a little more
Grothendieck.
Grothendieck. All right, fantastic. That his story, Labatut says, his history just reads like a wild fable, and that he made up nothing, right, regarding the story of Grothendieck. And it is a crazy story, right?
He says that in an interview that you saw.
Yes. So we have another chapter where essentially he's arranging the found materials, not changing them. So, we've used the metaphor of the artist as a weaver. Here he's weaving these strands into this another mini narrative about obsession, abstruse knowledge, and the way that takes people to the borders of madness, essentially. By the end, Grothendieck is a kind of mad holy man, right? He's renounced all worldly possessions. He's living in a flea-infested cabin without electricity. He is writing these strange works that are a blend of his mathematical ideas and spiritual notions, right? He's created another private language for himself. He's retreated from the world. And maybe we can get into the way in which all of this is following that trajectory of the thinker as radical explorer who reaches these moments of abyss, gets to the heart of the matter, reaches the inner landscapes of mathematics, and finds this thing called the scheme or the trace, right? This underlying principle beneath all mathematical knowledge, and the dangers inherent in that, right?
Yeah, well, again, I think we have the scientist as writer, the man of science as writer. I mentioned before that I think in some ways all of these characters, these men of science, are imagined by Labatut, or let's say allegorized as writers.
Right.
He's identifying men of science as writers, essentially authors authorities who create something new in a literary sense. And about Grothendieck, he says that he had a devotion to writing that bordered on the fanatical, and he loved choosing le mot juste. Like Flaubert, he's always looking for the right word, the proper word in every instance. It's like in the second chapter with Schwarzschild. Remember, he would even in when he was in battle, he would have his little notebook to scribble his ideas down. He always had that notebook with him in case he had an idea that he needed to record, just like a writer would. And so
Right.
I think that's a theme that runs through this book. The
Total and
scientist
absolute
as
devotion.
writer.
Yeah, in this case, the mathematician, right? We're told for years he devoted the whole of his energy, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, to mathematics. He did not read newspapers, watch television, or go to the cinema. Working in a cold office, flaking paint falling from the walls, his back turned to the only window, pen and paper at his desk. Only 4 objects as decoration: his mother's desk mask, a small wire sculpture of a goat, and a jar of Spanish olives, a charcoal portrait of his father, etc., who died in a concentration camp. So that harkens back to the previous chapters, right, about the horrors of World War II, right?
Well,
Chapter
yes,
1.
he died of Zyklon B poisoning
Yeah.
at Auschwitz.
So there we go, another echo of the first chapter, right? And
Yep.
so we have another portrait of, as you said, this obsessive genius writer, someone who's alien. I mean, all of the characters, all of the historical figures that we're dealing with are metaphorical aliens, right? They are as if from another planet. That's one of the phrases you mentioned that Grothendieck is described as, right, earlier. So they're almost a different kind of species of humans, right?
Mm.
Give us these great discoveries, but also lead us to these abysses, these dangerous abysses.
Well, what are the dangers? Because Mochizuki, it was speculated that perhaps he had succumbed to Grothendieck's curse, and Mochizuki himself, after publishing his theory, didn't he like delete it from his webpage, and he asked that no one contact him or discuss it further because he said certain things should remain hidden for the good of all of us.
Right.
What if he is indeed Grothendieck's spiritual heir, or even his, mathematical heir? Um, what is the curse, and has he succumbed to it?
The curse seems to be, and this is where maybe a little fictionalizing happens, right? That Mochizuki, like Grothendieck, delves so far into the mathematical universe that he reaches this moment of horrific epiphany. So we're told that while at Princeton, while Mochizuki was devouring all the works of Grothendieck, right, which itself is madness, right? How do you read in that language? But we're told that his roommate at Princeton, and this again, like, I don't know if this I suspect might be some fictionalizing here, remembers having found him delirious at midnight after days without sleep or food. Exhausted and dehydrated, he babbled incoherently, his pupil as wide as an owl's. He spoke of the quote-unquote heart of the heart, an entity Grothendieck had discovered at the very center of mathematics, which had completely unhinged him. And the next day, apparently, had no memory of the night before, right? So supposedly
that seems highly fictionalized.
Yeah,
but
it is.
But it's quite plausible. It's well imagined, I would say, and believable.
And that's the moment of the frame narrative of chapter 3, where we go from Mochizuki and then we sort of transition to Grothendieck's legacy. And we hear later that Grothendieck himself, in his vast explorations, conquering new territories like an explorer, right? That we're told that the pinnacle of his investigations was the concept of motive, a ray of light capable of illuminating every conceivable incarnation of a mathematical object. The heart of the heart, he called this strange entity located at the crux of the mathematical universe, of which we know nothing save its faintest glimmers. And then later, after spending so long gazing down at the foundations of mathematics, his mind had stumbled into an abyss. So here we have
I think you mentioned this. It's also described as the shadow of a new horror.
Yeah, it's described as the scheme as well. The scheme, the motive, the heart of the heart, and it echoes the other discoveries from the previous chapters, right? Certainly the
Schwarzschild's singularity. That's exactly what I was thinking.
Right. And then later, the next section that we'll talk about next time, the strange realms of quantum physics, right? So,
but with Schwarzschild's singularity, we can at least understand it as, I mean, in the literal sense, it's basically a black hole, right?
Right.
Like this concept, the heart of the heart, seems much more nebulous. I mean, the Schwarzschild's singularity, this black hole was then like, I don't know, applied to like sociology and psychology and so on, and that's a little bit more abstract, but at least there's something concrete we can think about. What is the heart of the heart? Like, do you have a clear understanding of it? It seems very vague, which, I mean, was he ever able to, I guess it's something ineffable. No one was able to explain it. Impossible to understand, as some of the mathematicians said. Like, you can't even conceive of it.
Apparently, later in the chapter, after Grothendieck has become the mad monk retreating from the world, he's isolating, according to the narrative, right, to protect mankind from his discovery, the shadow of a new horror, we're told. And of course, we do think back to the singularity and so on and so forth. The book ends, and this is a fictionalized scene, I think, with a Japanese mathematician. Obviously, it's Mochizuki, right? Visiting Grothendieck on his deathbed, right? And the suggestion there that here the two men who really understand this heart of the heart, this inner reach of the mathematical universe and how dangerous it is. So what is it? Well, it's analogous to the same kind of, ways that physicists get to the inner landscape of the quantum world, or that the singularity. What is that if not, the solutions to Einstein's formulas for general relativity? In other words, it's this powerful mathematical thinking is that which undergirds all of these pursuits, right? The ability to think in highly abstract ways. And I think I mentioned in one of the previous podcasts how Labatut has said very much that he is interested in exploring the danger of ideas divorced from flesh, a phrase I really like. So
that's his phrase. He said that.
That's his phrase in interviews. Yeah, the danger of ideas divorced from flesh, right? And so the human species capacity, at least geniuses can do this, not us, right? To delve into these realms pose two dangers. One, to the sanity of the explorer, right? The ongoing theme of obsession leading to madness, right? But two, obviously, to humanity as well, right? The singularity, quantum physics, right? Atomic warfare, etc., right? So, what is the heart of the heart? Who fucking knows? It's like that which undergirds the abstract realms of mathematics, right? That it holds an inherent danger. And the book ends, right, in the briefest section with, right, a mathematician who has also retreated from the world, right? And we'll get to that certainly later.
Well, that Japanese visitor, who, as you say, is clearly understood as Mochizuki, he performs a kind of sacred mission on behalf of his guru, let's say, right? When well, I don't know if I should mention the spoiler, but he kind of helps Grothendieck realize his declaration of non-publication. Remember,
Yeah.
at the end of his life, after he's become the hermit, the recluse, the mystic, he doesn't want his ideas disseminated throughout the world again. In fact, he denounces the vile and dangerous practice of mathematics,
Right.
saying it was not politicians who would destroy the planet, but scientists like him and his colleagues who were marching like sleepwalkers
Hmm.
towards the apocalypse.
Right.
So what do you think? I mean, I think I know the answer, but I want to hear what you say. What caused this change in him? Why did he suddenly uh, turn against his profession? When did he have this awakening?
Are you talking about? You're talking about Grothendieck,
Yes.
right? Uh, I suppose it's like at the point in his life when he started late 60s, early 70s, and he experimented with sort of communal living, spiritual retreats, right? That kind of monkish retreat from the world, right? Um, I think that's the moment where he pushes away from mathematics. He's done all he could. He's, according to Labatut, seen what's at the heart of the mathematical universe, understood its dangers, right, of this shadow of a new horror. And at that point, there's that retreat from the world.
But he's also radicalized by Vietnam and
He is. There's the
the May
political,
the
right,
May '68 protests in Paris.
right. Yeah, exactly, right. There's that as well. And then by the end of we're told that towards the end of his life, his point of view was so remote that he was only capable of perceiving totality. Of his personality, nothing but tatters remained, tenuous threads pulled apart by years of constant meditation. And so there we are, right? Has he achieved total enlightenment, right? The eradication of the personality as, reaching another level of another spiritual level, or is this someone who has descended into kind of madness? And so, these are not wholly original questions, but they're provocatively posed through the depiction of this real life person, right? Like, what does spiritual enlightenment mean, right? Is that a monkish elevation above the world? Have you reached this level of spiritual equanimity and vision, or are you a lunatic, right? Divorced from mankind, right? Unable to form human bonds, etc. That's where we're left at the end, I think.
Well, this is why I think I was, as I was reading this chapter, I was so much reminded of William Blake, who
Hmm.
famously said he had to create his own system so as not to be enslaved by another man's, right? And
Right.
here again, uh, it could be that the scientist is a kind of artist or man of letters, right? We have this person who also invented his own kind of mystical system, right? He drew up a cryptic list tracing out the stations of his spiritual journey. He
Oh
believed that
God. Yeah.
he was visited by uh, these goddesses, I guess, or one goddess with two aspects, right? Flora and Lucifera,
Right.
right? So Flora suggests flower, that's like the kindly aspect, but then this goddess also has like a fiendish satanic aspect, right? It's like a feminine form of Lucifer.
Right.
Uh, and apparently this goddess visited him in his dreams, as he says, or Labatut says, he came to believe dreams were not proper to human beings, but missives from an external entity he called Le Revue, who sent them to allow us to recognize our true identities. And then he says, this le rêveur, the dreamer, is none other than God.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this
So
Blake doesn't focus so much on dreams as, imagination, but people called him mad as well, right? And yet he created his own system, just
his own
as
system that comes through us through verse that enchants us. Whereas I'm not sure I'm going to read, apparently, this book you're talking about. Between 1983 and 1986, Grothendieck wrote Reaping and Sowing, Reflections and Testimonies from a Mathematician's Mind. It's apparently an outlandish work that no one in France dared to publish. Over thousands of pages.
See, that makes me want to read it. I want to
Oh
read
yeah.
it when I hear
Well, you
that.
let me know how it goes, because apparently it's thousands of pages, replete with what one colleague described as mathematical phantasmagorias. Right. Um, uh, Apparently, in this work, Grothendieck delves into his own psyche and to attempt to understand everything. That sort of desire for total vision, right? Revealing a vast and terrifying intellect stripped increasingly bare, precariously balanced between enlightenment and paranoia. And then the entries that you were mentioning, things like April 1 through 7th, 1974, Moment of Truth, Entry into the Spiritual Path. I'm just picking at random here, right? August 1974, Insufficiency of the Law. I have learned, I leave the paternal universe. Later, apparently in 79 to 80, I managed to meet my parents. Then there's like Discovery of the Wolf. What does the fuck does all this mean? So he's having all these epiphanies, recording them. At what point do you have your own private language that is so private that you become inaccessible to other human beings? No one can understand that language except yourself, which is essentially the language of deep mathematics, right? Whereas William Blake, yes, he created his own systems of thought, fashioned them through imagination, and yet they're accessible, right? We can read The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, right? We can read Songs
Well,
of
I'm
Innocence and
thinking,
Experience, and we can take things from that private universe. So that private universe, Blake's, I would say, is one that has doors open to humanity. Even if, of course, we don't understand all of Blake, right? But we can get in and appreciate its aesthetic wonders and its spiritual ideas. This, to me, is impenetrable to anyone other than the writer, right? Locked in
well, but
his private language.
I don't know because I haven't read it, but
Well, that's the way it's presented, at least, right?
Blake's prophetic books. I don't know if you've read the Four Zoas. That's
You've read more Blake than I. I've read
yeah,
the ones I've mentioned, but I know you've read.
that's
Have you read all of Blake?
I have read
Okay.
his complete works, yes,
All right.
or at least everything that's in my edition. But some of it is quite esoteric, and some of it, to my surprise, was much more Christological than I expected.
Right.
But some people say that those works, those later prophetic books, are also impenetrable. People said the same thing about Joyce's Finnegan's Wake, which also
Sure.
is very
Those are good
much.
analogies, right? Like you and I read Ulysses together. I don't know if I'll ever go back. I'll go back and read parts at a time. You took the further step of reading Finnegan's Wake. I try to read a couple pages to see if I do it with you, and I said, "Fuck this!" Right? So it's
Yeah.
so yeah, these
But see,
construction,
I feel I do understand it quite well, and I feel
right?
like I can I can follow the narrative. Now, it was at times a tedious experience, but I made it all the way through, and I've revisited certain passages many times over, and I've even written my own parody of Finnegan's Wake, which, by the way, is available in my latest book,
Shameless
Earnest
plug.
Games.
All
There it
right.
is. But
Well, I'll tell you what, if you end up reading Reaping and Sowing, Reflections and Testimonies from a Mathematician's Past, as I said, please just give me the synopsis, because I won't be joining you in this in that endeavor.
well, thousands and thousands of pages. That's I might look at some excerpts. I,
There you
I
go,
don't know
right?
that I would read it in its entirety, because probably probably it's not as fascinating as, you know, Blake's prophetic works or Joyce's Finnegan's Wake. But I don't
but
know. I
let
mean,
me.
I think Labatut is a bit dismissive, a bit derisive about this. You know, he, like when he describes Grothendieck's Survive and Live project, he says that he pursued this with a degree of naivete that bordered on idiocy. I mean, maybe that's true, but like, is it necessarily foolish or absurd that he attempted this communal living, or this fasting, and that he was concerned about ecology and pacifism?
Yeah, I mean, I hear that. At the same time, if he's to be trusted, and he did say that everything he wrote about Grothendieck was factual, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, yes, tone and so on, right? There might be a little bit of poking, right? But I think Labatut's just in awe, in kind of fearful awe of these men that he's writing about, these historical figures who delve into these deep realms. So I don't think it's mockery or derision so much as just almost incredulous wonder. Like how do people go so far into their explorations, and what happens to them when this happens, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, is he mocking? I don't think the point is to sort of sneer and mock at these men, but rather hold them up in wonder, with a certain level of distress, right? Given where these men end up.
Yes. Well, I mean, it was really just that one phrase that gave me pause. You
Right.
know, it's like, uh, maybe it was a failed experiment, but, you know, I think his motivation may and his intention may have been quite a good thing, right? Like the desire to escape the insanity of the 20th century and look for alternatives. You know, people should not be shamed for that, even if their experiments don't work out. That's we're all looking for some way out of the nightmare of the 20th century that has continued into the present century, right?
Sure. And I think though then with Grothendieck, right, the answer is to retreat from the world. And maybe I'm repeating myself, but this monkish retreat, right? That is the where he was ultimately led, right? You have to take a step back. Uh, is it misanthropy? Is it enlightenment? These are kind of open-ended questions there at the end, right? So Grothendieck at the end remains an enigma. Uh, Labatut has given us the facts; he's arranged them, and so on. And by the end, it's as if we're just meant to think, what was this life? Where did it end up? Right? Um, was it inevitable that he would sort of end up where he ended up, given how far he traversed these realms of abstraction?
Well,
Fascinating stuff.
at during this time, you know, when he becomes a recluse and he's fasting, it's not clear whether he also fasted sexually. I mean, it seems like he was a freak to the end, right? Like it's suggested that he slept with one of the girls from the commune. I mean, that may be completely fictionalized, but that this is this is mentioned more than once, so it makes me think it's an important detail, right? Like he's quoted as saying, "Doing mathematics is like making love," and then Labatut makes a point of saying that throughout his life he seduced both men and women. Like
Yeah.
he had a voracious sexual appetite. He was a kind of freak, you know. So in his later days, when he's uh, removed himself from the world and he's fasting and so on, does he like conquer all of his desires, or does he still
Right.
need to sate his lust
I
in
mean, by the end, my impression is he's
certain
a
ways?
mad Gandalfian monk who is in retreat, living isolated, divorced from humanity, divorced from family. Right. There's apparently uh, a female mathematician who, I looked it up, she did visit him and corresponded with him a little bit at the end of his life, and then he cut that off as well, right? But at that point, he's this old, crabby, you know, crusty, monkish figure, right? Maybe by ending like, there's this one passage that maybe is a counterpoint to some of the things we've been saying, right? On the one hand, Labatut is depicting these radical voyagers into realms of abstruseness, as we've been talking about, and the dangers inherent to both the voyager and humanity. At the same time, there are passages like this that suggest, okay, before Grothendieck got to the heart of the heart and had to renounce mathematics and retreat from the world and end up in a moment of either enlightenment or madness, maybe there's no difference. Um, there's this beautiful passage, right, about discovery, right? And we're told that despite how radical they were, the mathematical landscapes Grothendieck conjured up gave no impression of artificiality. To the trained eyes of a mathematician, they reveal themselves as seemingly natural environments. For Grothendieck did not impose his will on things, preferring to let them grow and develop by themselves. The results had an organic beauty, as though each idea had bud and borne fruit following its own vital impulse. It's a beautiful lyrical passage in the way that it kind of humanizes the inner mathematical realms of discovery, right? As these natural realms that here's the mathematician not compelling them, but coaxing them to bear fruit, right? There's a kind of fertility there in the heart of things. Now that fertility is both beautiful but ultimately terrifying, right? And when we talk about the final section, we end with a very similar image. The final image of the book is of nature kind of exploding in its profligacy and excess before death. So the idea of organic bursting before the inevitability of the ensuing decay, right? And I wonder if, but there's beauty in that moment of discovery, right? And sort of coaxing the mathematical universe to bear its fruits. I was very moved by that passage. I thought that was very lovely.
Well, see, everyone admits that the man was a genius to the extent, I mean, those in the know, those
Right.
that understand, they admit that his discoveries were brilliant and he's a genius. But then there comes a certain point where they say, oh, now he's just lost his mind. Like, how can we be sure of that? Maybe we or they, even those mathematical experts, were just not able to follow him. Or maybe it's, like a question of taste. Like,
Well,
I remember Cornel West talking about the music of John Coltrane. Like, he said, A Love Supreme is one of the most beautiful pieces of music I've ever heard. That is like his ultimate achievement. But when he went off into this more experimental type stuff, I can't follow him there. I'm not interested. But that's just okay. That's fine. Like, for you, A Love Supreme is his ultimate work. But this genius went another direction. Like, you can't say, like, for certain that he went in the wrong direction. Maybe it's
no,
just the
not, but maybe
direction
just,
you're not interested in,
well, in directions that are maybe inaccessible to most for whatever reasons. Like there's the John Coltrane of Love Supreme and the John Coltrane of Interstellar Space and Beyond. Interesting that that record called Interstellar Space, it's much more cacophonous, experimental. There's no melody, right? It feels disjointed, it sounds more like just, doesn't sound like music, right? So that's actually a good analogy, right? Pushing the musical landscape there to the point where it becomes cacophony and sound rather than that which mellifluously, right, and aesthetically moves us, right? The artist reaches a private language that perhaps becomes inaccessible to most. With the case of Grothendieck, right? Who's to say, as you're saying, where he ended up and what it was? I think that's why we have the frame narrative of Mochizuki, right? We can't
Mm-hmm.
understand Grothendieck's inner realms, or maybe only a few can, right? And then when he left mathematics, he went into whatever kind of spiritual journeys, in his own esoteric language. But part of why he renounces mathematics is because of getting to that innermost core of the core, the heart of the heart, right? The trace, the motive, whatever. Mochizuki is, and this is where the fictionalizing comes in at the beginning and the end of the chapter. He is someone who clearly can reach that level of abstraction, just like the genius Grothendieck, right? And he recognizes the same inner horror, right? So I guess he is there to maybe tip us in the direction of, all right, Grothendieck maybe did reach some level of enlightenment, but that enlightenment includes this recognition of this innermost horror when it comes to ideas divorced from flesh, right? And it becomes almost a kind of ominous warning against the consequences of that kind of radical, unbounded thinking.
Mm-hmm. Well, to follow up on my uh, comment related to Cornell West's feelings about Coltrane, I mean, I basically agree with Cornell West about Coltrane's greatest work, but I also think we should be cautious about dismissing these other experiments, right? Like if you really recognize the greatness of an artist or maybe a mathematician or scientist too, you have to take seriously all of their experiments, even if you can't follow them, even if you don't fully appreciate them, to say that they're madness, that seems like an easy way out, right? Like it's just madness. We don't have to think about it. We don't have to try to understand it. Like, who are we to say that he wasn't on to something?
Yeah. Uh, yeah, true. I mean, I understand that, but let's go back to the analogy with, say, Joyce and Finnegan's Wake.
Mm-hmm.
Pushing aesthetic boundaries, the boundaries of the imagination, right, to realms of just not incomprehensibility, but a kind of comprehensibility that takes so much work that one wonders if it's the effort. And so you have someone like Ezra Pound, who was incredibly supportive of Joyce, right? Not just with Portrait of the Artist, right, but including Ulysses, right? Celebrated that work, and then drew the line with Finnegan's Wake. So Ezra Pound, himself a radical modernist experimenter, right? Uh, nobody, he by no means is he someone who is working within conventional aesthetic parameters. Says apparently about Finnegan's Wake. Here's a quote I found: "Nothing so far as I can make out, nothing short of divine vision or new cure for the clap, could possibly be worth all these circumambient peripherization."
Mm.
What a prick! But that's pretty fucking hilarious, right? So yeah, I mean, okay, yes, there is value in
But
like Joyce.
again,
There's
people might say the same thing about his cantos,
no,
right? Like
of course.
how many people have read the cantos in their entirety? I have, but how many
Not
others?
I, but you're the completionist that I'm not, right? I've read out sections from, but of course, yeah. See, people could say the same thing. My point is that for someone who was already pushing realms himself and interested in experimentation and shoring up the
Mm-hmm.
fragments and so on, right? Um, Finnegan's Wake was too far, right? So I guess the question is, yeah, there's value in that kind of stuff, but at some point, the audience for such things becomes increasingly small. And with Grothendieck's work at the end, right, the audience becomes an audience of one in terms of his spiritual um, uh, productions at the end of the world,
Well,
right?
well, at least an audience of two, right? Because Mochizuki
Right.
went with him all the way.
Well, and then Mochizuki came to his deathbed and essentially was there to hammer home the idea that, some things are best left unexplored, right? It's one thing to aesthetically experiment, right, and come up with something like Interstellar Space or Finnegan's Wake. Wonderful. There it is, right? But those things don't pose any dangers to humanity. Maybe to the sanity of the creator, that's debatable, right? Was Joyce fucking crazy to make Finnegan's Wake? Okay, that becomes kind of a fun little parlor question, but in the case of deep mathematical explorations, if you're getting to the heart of the matter, right, or scientific explorations that result in things like, atomic warfare or whatnot, right? At that point, those kinds of knowledge pilgrimages, right, are dangerous. Right. And so that would make it different from just aesthetic explorations of Joyce, Blake, Pound, etc. Right.
Well, this is a good lead into the next section, which we will be discussing in the fourth installment of this series. We will look at what? Quantum theory,
Quantum
particles
theory,
and waves,
Heisenberg and Schrodinger,
yeah,
excuse me. So
and all of the dangerous consequences of their theories and discoveries.
fantastic. I will look forward to it. That's sort of the heart of the book, right? Because the book is called in English "When We Cease to Understand the World." That is the title of the next chapter, "When We Cease to Understand the World." And as we mentioned in our first episode, the title in Spanish, the original, is Un Verdor Terrible, right? So the English translators decided to take the title of this next chapter and make it the title of the book, right? Because it does sort of embody what this book seems to be. When we cease to understand the world, right? You're pushing the limits of knowledge to the point where you get to these realms of unknowability, abstruseness, etc. But yeah, it's the longest section. It's the section that he calls Labatut it's in the register of a novella, and so we'll have a lot to talk about regarding taking facts and then taking liberties and fictionalizing, right, to create a narrative. He does that, like the explosion of fiction in this chapter is, I think, something we'll look forward to talking about.
All right, well, we'll pick it up there next time.
Ta-ta.
Take care, everyone.